So apparently, we've done it. We finally reached the part of the MMORPG timeline where uttering the word woke causes the entire liberal hive mind to emerge from the shadows like it's a DMM breach event in the forums. One man spoke, one man dared to say, hey, maybe finishing the Daemonheim dig site instead of a pride parade wasn't the best use of development time, and for that, he must be destroyed. Kathaar marched into frame 72 hours later armed with dictionary definitions and Wikipedia links claiming body types and censorship have nothing to do with politics. Meanwhile, Jagex is over here tweeting that a wizard with a beard and a gender button has always been LGBTQ canon since 2002. So now we're going to look at both videos, both arguments, and we're going to ask the real question. What happens when you challenge the people who claim to fight for tolerance but can't tolerate dissent? What happens when you say the quiet part out loud and it goes viral within the RuneScape 3 creator niche to the point that even Asmongold's community takes notice?
You're really gonna piss them off with this one, huh?
We've got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Good morning, Gillinor, and welcome to AFK News, your source for the latest and greatest RuneScape news. I'm your host, AFKing, and joining me is Nora, my news-oriented RuneScape assistant.
Happy to be here. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's dive in, and without further ado, welcome to AFK News.
So in case any of you have never heard of Prideslayer and missed his last video, WOKEScape, here's how it starts.
RuneScape 3 used to genuinely be a game that people were excited to play. You couldn't wait to get off work or school to kill the newest boss or do the newest quest with your friends. But unfortunately, now those types of updates are few and far between, being greatly overshadowed by holiday seasonals, which are essentially MTX casinos or outright just MTX itself, like treasure hunter updates. I think we can all agree that even if you still love RuneScape, the game is a hollow shell of what it used to be. We used to look forward to epic content like the archaeology skill or Elder God Wars, or quests where we stop horrors from another universe, but now we get month-long seasonal MTX events where we gather snowballs or go on carrot boat races. Microtransactions make up about 1/3 of Jagex's total profit, so where is all this money going in revenue that RuneScape 3 Treasure Hunter is generating? Why does Jagex continue to make content for a small minority of players when RuneScape has record low player count? How did it end up like this? And what does this have to do with woke?
Let's start with what I believe is the foundation of his entire argument. RuneScape didn't just randomly evolve into WOKEScape overnight. This was a slow, deliberate process, one patch here, one identity feature there, and suddenly the Makeover Mage's beard is a diversity hire.
Mom, look, it's a bearded lady.
Prideslayer calls it a pattern, and he's right. Activist devs, ideologically aligned studios, the same few inclusion features copy-pasted into every game, always right when content quality starts dropping. It's not a coincidence, it's a blueprint. He even defines woke for clarity: the performative adoption of radical ideology in order to virtue signal and ultimately sell more product. Pretty straightforward, right?
So that's why he named it How Wokeness Killed RuneScape. Of course. I find his definition of woke peculiar. A performative adoption of radical ideology. Well, seeing as Prideslayer has done nothing so far to warrant me trusting his word, let me check on that definition of his. According to Merriam-Webster, the modern definition for woke is aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. That is a wildly different definition. But are we honestly surprised? Nothing about this definition fits his argument. So instead, he uses a definition loosely tied to the disingenuous hijacking of the term by right-wing parties. Again, as per Merriam-Webster, woke is often used mockingly or sarcastically to suggest insincerity about one's expressed beliefs about social issues. Let me be frank here for a moment. If the crux of your entire argument relies on you using a mocking pseudo-definition of a term to make your point, your argument is weak. If the point you're trying to make here holds any water, it should be easy to make that argument without resorting to lying, misinformation, and pandering. If you can't, well, again, that says a lot about the strength of your argument, doesn't it?
Kathaar counters this like we're in a middle school debate club. Actually, the dictionary says woke just means being alert to injustice. Yeah, no one ever twisted that into a weapon before. Next, you'll tell me equity just means fairness and not corporate sanctioned discrimination. He goes full, well, actually,
lying, misinformation, and pandering
mode for 90 seconds, as if the core problem here is word choice.
Lying, misinformation, and pandering.
Not the fact Runescape is turning into an HR department in cosplay.
Didn't they also change the definition of racism a couple years ago?
They sure did. And vaccine. And woman. And let's not forget the time the CDC changed the definition of herd immunity mid-pandemic to exclude natural infection. When Kathaar says
lying, misinformation, and pandering,
he's projecting harder than a college film major with daddy issues. This is the same guy who unironically thinks using a rainbow emoji in an update makes it immune to criticism. But sure, Prideslayer's the one
lying, misinformation, and pandering.
Here's the real sleight of hand. Kathaar and the rest of the Reddit echo chamber keep saying other MMOs have this tool too, and that settles the debate. Yeah, and those MMOs are also run by the same activist pipeline. You're not making a case. You're outlining the pattern. It's not representation. It's replacement. Lore replaced with slogans, story replaced with spectacle. RuneScape's not being updated. It's being rebranded.
Next patch. Emotional support, yak, and a safe space Slayer dungeon.
Don't give them any ideas.
So what does any of this have to do with the bearded lady again?
Oh, everything. Because the beard wasn't the feature, it was the flag planted on top of it.
So we of course can't forget that RuneScape changed the gender binary in the game from male and female to body type A and B, and even though this is clear and obvious pandering, it wasn't enough. They needed to go and post on Twitter on the Jagex account that the Makeover Mage that you go to in order to change your character gender was actually one of the longest standing LGBTQ characters. This is totally just revisionist history, and this character always obeyed the binary of male and female, and again, was just a virtue signal.
So the player base has been asking for a full-on avatar rework for years. Better customization, modern visuals, updated rigging. We rubbed the genie lamp, and Jagex heard us loud and clear, and we got a player identity update.
The genie told Jagex that it would grant them 3 wishes. And they spent them all on Wish.com. They technically got what they ordered. They just didn't read the product description first.
And those who dared say anything about it silenced. The Reddit mods were doing laps around the thought police of Hitler's Nazi Germany.
Let me ask you, viewer, if you were to just watch this clip completely out of context, which game would you think he's talking about? RS3? Yeah, me too. It's the only thing he's been referencing or discussing up until this point, so that makes sense. So imagine my surprise when I log into RS3 and check Makeover Mage to see male and female. Surely Prideslayer's journalistic integrity means he didn't make a mistake and hallucinate an update that didn't happen, right? Right? This update only happened in old school RuneScape. Of course, he never states this or even remotely implies this. Instead, he implies the opposite and just makes up something that doesn't exist. Who doesn't love a bit of misinformation in our wildly under-researched propaganda videos? Also, if old school RuneScape has this whole type A, type B thing going on, how come you aren't harping on that game for having gone woke? Is it because old school RuneScape doesn't have predatory microtransactions? You seem to keep making this connection that MTX is woke, when you could just as easily say MTX is bad or MTX is over-predatory, and you'd have a much easier time making your argument. Speaking of the Makeover Mage, he goes on to claim that Jagex tweeting that the Makeover Mage is the game's oldest oldest LGBTQ character is revisionist history. According to a postbag from The Hedge from 2006, does anybody here remember those? The Makeover Mage goes by Pete or PETA, depending on their mood. The Makeover Mage changes genders at will. The Makeover Mage has 2 names that they like to go by based on their mood. This is the textbook definition of agender, and as such, plants the Makeover Mage squarely in the LGBTQ community. And again, this was in 2006. The Gowers were still running the show. What revisionist history are you talking about? When do we get to the journalistic integrity part? He goes on for a while. At this point, you'll notice a bit of a pattern. Point at something woke and then blame it on the game's current state with no real way to back that claim. Just conjecture. Who doesn't love a bit of misinformation in our wildly under-researched propaganda videos? Again, he almost has a point here, touching on subjects like in-game money-making methods seeing nerfs, but microtransactions being unchanged. He's so close to having a real argument here. But then, like a bad habit, he ties it back into woke somehow. It's clear to me at this point that the Slayer of Pride doesn't care much about microtransactions in RuneScape and its negative effect on the game. If he did, he'd focus on that, instead of this wishy-washy everything I hate is woke and I hate MTX mindset. The reality is, he has nothing substantial to say on microtransactions that hasn't already been discussed in greater depth by others countless times before. He has nothing new to add to the conversation, so he's fabricating something new to draw attention to himself. Do you think Asmongold would be interested in watching a half-assed complaint video about microtransactions? Of course not. That's been done already. But tying it into wokeness and how the left ruins everything? Lying, misinformation, and pandering. Now we're talking. But hey, maybe I'm wrong, in which case I'm sure the several pleas for Asmongold's attention are purely coincidental. So if MTX isn't the real reason he made this video, then what the hell is? Get to the damn point already.
This is where Kathaar decides it's time to play grown-up journalist. He starts debunking, or should I say debunking, a video that was clearly an opinion piece with the energy of a Wikipedia editor who's 2 edits away from a nervous breakdown while completely missing the point.
Lying, misinformation, and pandering.
Kathaar has the journalistic integrity of a BuzzFeed listicle.
This man is over here going, well, actually, the body types only launched in OSRS. Checkmate, bigot.
Squarely.
Like that changes the argument. Jagex is one company, one brand, and they posted this. You can't pretend like these choices are unrelated. You think the RS3 and OSRS devs are operating in ideological vacuums. No, they're all sipping the same HR diversity Kool-Aid.
So why pretend it's not political?
Because they need plausible deniability. That's why they don't call it an ideological update. They call it a player identity feature.
Lying, misinformation, and pandering.
Kathaar, let me help you. Player identity is branding language. It's what companies use when they want to change the product but make it sound empowering. Like when food labels say, now with 30% less guilt. But no, it's definitely not ideological because Kathaar said so. And as we all know, anyone who speaks with that much Reddit confidence must be totally unbiased. And here's the twist. Even if some players asked for this, the way it was rolled out, the timing, the language, it reeks of activism. It's not a feature. It's a flex. It's like asking your waiter for a steak and getting handed a tofu sculpture of RuPaul. Technically it's food, but it isn't what you ordered.
But it's more inclusive.
And less filling. And let's not ignore how Kathaar accuses Prideslayer of
lying, misinformation, and pandering,
while dodging the real point. This isn't about one quest, or one patch, or even MTX, which he thinks is the main target of the video, and woke is the vehicle he's using to convey the message. Wrong! Woke is the cancer, and MTX is fueling it. This isn't about a pattern. When studios insert ideology into the product and shut down anyone who notices, that's capture. That's control.
So Prideslayer is saying it's not about one feature like MTX or Treasure Hunter. It's about the entire framework?
Exactly. But when you change the framework, you don't have to debate your critics. You can just label them outdated, like your definition of woke, old, whitewashed, outdated, liberal hive mind nonsense.
Right?
Before we move on, let's talk about the Makeover Mage. You know, the legendary gender-fluid wizard who apparently has been smashing the binary since 2002.
Squarely.
Yeah, because obviously the beard, robe, and bubbling cauldron scream rainbow flag. Prior to that tweet, the mage was a silly gag NPC who turned you into a puddle and rebuilt you out of spare polygons.
That's not a gender allegory. That's a Craigslist plastic surgeon.
But here's the spin. Kathaar claims that back in 2006, the mage already canonically went by Pete or Peta depending on their mood. And that proves the entire gender fluid thing isn't a retcon because the Gower brothers were still in charge. Cute theory. One problem. By 2006, the Gower brothers had already sold off a 35% stake in the company. And guess who they sold it to? That's right, an investment firm. That, according to their own website, is now proudly pushing DEI initiatives. Same firm, same owners, same trend. So this idea that it was pure Gower era innocence, not so fast.
So the old school lore they're citing from the hedge was already brought to you by the future of DEIB investing?
History is written by the shareholders, Kathaar. I'm sorry, but your debunking is turning more and more and more into the same old debunking that the hive mind is oh so famous for.
Lying, misinformation, and pandering.
And even if the mage was written that way back then, and we could rely on actual in-game text and not some hijacked hedge article from 2006, the fact that it only got branded as LGBTQ during Pride Month 2021 kind of proves the point. It's not about canon. It's about timing and virtue signaling. Hey, look at us. We're an LGBTQ-friendly game studio willing to virtue signal with the best of them during Pride Month. Come play our game because we're hip.
Retroactive virtue signaling. Coming to a wiki edit sprinkled with a little of the Mandela effect near you.
If RuneScape lore suddenly says Bob the Cat is a pansexual shape-shifting furry next week,
Squarely.
I'm not buying that either. The Makeover Mage wasn't a symbol. It was a meme. But when the ideology demands a flag bearer, the narrative gets updated.
Speaking of flag bearers,
I examined one of the community managers' posts on Blue Sky where they unnecessarily were picking at players and calling them incels for not wanting DEI in their games. This community manager hadn't even been with the company for a year yet, and it felt incredibly unneeded to pick a fight, especially when every day less and less people want to play RuneScape. But thankfully, if your main goal is political activism at the cost of players, they picked the right person for the job. If you've paid any attention to news in the UK, immigration has been a hot topic.
Why should English people pay for you to have a house?
This was especially true in the case of the Southport killer, the son of an immigrant who stabbed 11 little girls in a dance studio and resulted in 3 of them dying. Well, during a vigil that was being held for these dead little girls, the community manager of RuneScape, of course, marched through London calling people racist for not wanting their children stabbed by immigrants. Now, do I think that he posted this in order to be an evil individual and mock the parents of dead children? No, I don't. I think that he posted this thinking that players were going to be like, whoa, that's so cool. That's so brave and strong of you. But in fact, people like me were absolutely disgusted. But unfortunately, creators in the UK aren't allowed to speak out on this topic, as you can be jailed for that. So thankfully, this production takes place in the United States of America. Thank you, First Amendment.
Mod Yuey, the community manager at the center of the Ban First, Ask Questions Never moderation policy, who calls the players in his community incels, tweeted about marching in solidarity against racism while at a protest after the Southport killer's rampage in a dance studio in the UK, one that gained notoriety for seemingly backing a radical Islamic terrorist. And just look at the signs in the crowd. Smash, fascism and racism, refugees welcome, no Islamophobia, no anti-Semitism. It sounds real inclusive until you realize they were chanting all in defense of a guy who stabbed 2 adults and 10 little girls, killing 3 of them while saying you're Islamophobic. I mean, come on. How many red flags does it take before we're allowed to say, hey, maybe this guy shouldn't be the one filtering RuneScape feedback threads? Yuey wasn't just at a protest, he was at that protest. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying Mod Yuey personally supports terrorism. I'm saying he willingly showed up to a rally defending someone who killed 3 kids and injured 8 more alongside 2 adults while holding a paid job as the community manager for RuneScape, deciding what speech is safe on RuneScape forums.
So what did Kathaar have to say about that?
I knew it! Before I even decided to watch this video, I knew it was only a matter of time before he mentioned Mod Yuey. For those who don't know, I used to consider Prideslayer a friend. You know, back when his biggest obsession was thinking he could save them and doing crazy deep dives on the lore of the game. I took a lot of flack for sticking up for this guy because I believed he always had good intentions, despite what he would say. But late 2024, he went on a deep dive of Mod Yuey's history, and I had the misfortune of having to listen to him go on and on about conspiracy theories about this poor man. I ended up cutting ties with him shortly after I realized that while I was always willing to stick up for him, the feeling was far from mutual. But the spiraling never seemed to stop, and clearly, neither is his obsession with specific Jagex staff.
Did you catch that? The moment Yuey gets brought up, Kathaar hard pivots into conspiracy theory mode before he even lets Prideslayer even make a single point. Nothing to see here, folks. Just a man accusing you of
lying, misinformation, and pandering,
while speedrunning the Wikipedia page on how to discredit an argument without engaging with it.
What's this got to do with immigration?
The son of an immigrant.
Ah, I see. Follow-up question. Was the killer also an immigrant?
The son of an immigrant.
just kidding. Of course he doesn't answer that.
The son of an immigrant.
The answer is no. The killer was born in the UK.
The son of an immigrant.
And was a citizen by UK law.
The son of an immigrant.
So, again, what's this got to do with immigration?
The son of an immigrant.
Apparently nothing.
And then, brace for whiplash, he suddenly turns it into an immigration debate, as if that was the point Prideslayer was making. Spoiler, it wasn't. The issue isn't immigration in the UK or the US or how to go about immigration or immigration at all. It's that Yuey's ideology is captured by the radical progressive movement. There's a difference between being from somewhere else and bringing something else, especially when that something is extremist politics wrapped in a rainbow sticker, or in the case of the Southport killer, an Al-Qaeda training manual and ricin.
What? This is his argument? He's just going to blatantly lie to his viewers' faces like that? Not on my watch. Let's take a quick look at what actually happened. On July 29th, 2024, 17-year-old Axel Rudakabana, a UK citizen born in Wales,
the son of an immigrant,
perpetrated a mass stabbing in a dance studio in Southport, injuring 10 girls and killing 2, with a third succumbing to her injuries the following day. After news broke out, false information was released on social media that the killer's name was Ali al-Shakati, and that he was an asylum seeker who came to the UK by boat the previous year. The misinformation was propagated across the web by people like Andrew Tate and Channel 3 Now, a fake news site known for spreading misinformation in the past. Later on, Channel 3 Now would take down the misinformation news post, replacing it with an apology and confirming that the killer was not an immigrant.
The son of an immigrant.
The original social media post claiming the killer's name was Ali al-Shakati would later be deleted by the poster. By the next day, a riot broke out in Southport. People burned a police vehicle, threw bottles, bricks, and rocks at a mosque located close to the scene, and attacked police and news reporters. Known fascist groups like Patriotic Alternative were reported to be in attendance. It reached a point where even the mother of one of the victims was begging people to stop. It was clear at this point that the entire murder had been hijacked by people with ulterior motives. People looking to send a message. People looking to destroy. People looking for a fight. Over the next few days, mass anti-immigration protests and riots started to pop up around the nation. As Muslims, immigrants, and asylum seekers were being wrongfully targeted over the Southport stabbings, they understandably took to the streets of London in counter-protest. Mod Yuey, being a member of one of these targeted groups, of course took part in the peaceful protests. Furthermore, Prideslayer claims that the protest Yuey went to happened the same time as the vigil for the girls, August 11th. His argument is that attending a protest the same day a vigil took place for the deceased children is disgusting, but he yet again fails to get his facts straight and conveniently misses a key detail. August 11th wasn't the first vigil, nor was it the day of the protest. The initial vigil took place on July 30th. The one that would, later that day, be hijacked and turned into a riot. Of course, Prideslayer is not disgusted by hate groups and angry mobs turning what was meant to be a peaceful time of mourning in the wake of something tragic into a destructive riot meant to spread violence. The problem is clearly the people not wanting to get blamed for something they had nothing to do with. More vigils would take place later, including on August 11th. However, the protest Yuey participated in took place the day prior, August 10th. The screenshot Prideslayer uses of Mod Yuey's tweet even confirms this. A tweet from August 11th stating, "Very proud to have marched with the anti-racism march through London yesterday." So every angle he's pushing here falls flat immediately if you're even remotely familiar with the subject matter. The only disgusting thing here is Prideslayer using a horrific thing that happened, the Southport stabbing, as justification to target a person he doesn't like. The irony is so upsetting that I don't even have a joke I can toss in here to lighten the mood.
He's been filibustering like Cory Booker this entire time. And now he's out of material? Don't worry, Kathaar. Your monologue was the joke.
So then, Kathaar went full Reddit mod, pulling out a timeline chart like he's correcting a term paper and taking off points for a period being in the wrong place of your MLA citation. Well, actually, Yuey was there the day before the vigil, so everything's fine now.
That's like saying he joined the cult after the Kool-Aid incident, so he's not technically responsible.
Kathaar keeps trying to fact-check vibes, but you can't spreadsheet your way out of this. The problem isn't the day Yuey was protesting. It's that Jagex hired someone with clear activist leanings to manage player speech and report back in the first place. Runescape didn't get woke because one guy brought a picket sign to work. It got woke because a culture was allowed to walk through the front door, badge in, and start banning anyone who didn't clap hard enough.
So every angle he's pushing here falls flat immediately if you're even remotely familiar with the subject matter.
If you disagree with us, you're not only wrong, you're dangerous.
And that's the scariest part. It's not moderation, it's narrative control.
So, Mod Yuey backs radical Islamic terrorists. What else is he involved in?
I think that this position is being used to push politics. Now, I know what you're saying. That might be a stretch, right? But what if I told you that this individual was literally the founder of an activist LGBTQ organization? So here we have the UK's largest LGBTQ plus gaming group with a whopping 113 followers on Blue Sky and about 130 subscribers on YouTube. So after looking through all the media and reading all of the statements on this site as well as watching all their YouTube videos, it looks like the Gamers Inc. is essentially an LGBTQ plus advocacy group that bonds over drinking and playing video games. It's interesting though because I took a look at the community manager's LinkedIn account, which is public, and on there all of his references were people that are from this group, and I actually managed to find every single person on his reference list in the actual videos. It appears that the hiring managers for Jagex did not do their due diligence, and they're either A, lazy, or B, they wanted to hire an LGBTQ activist as community manager of a 25-year-old game.
And there's the kicker. Yuey's not some rogue community manager with spicy X takes. He's literally the European director for Gamers Inc., an activist group that pushes LGBTQ plus policy into gaming spaces. So let's recap. This guy attends radical protests, publicly aligns with fringe causes, and moonlights as an executive for identity-based activist organizations. And he's the guy reviewing your player feedback about Yak Track cosmetics.
Oh, cool. So RuneScape moderation is now brought to you by the DEI Avengers.
And if you raise a concern, you're labeled a bigot, or a conspiracy theorist, or Kathaar's personal favorite,
lying, misinformation, and pandering. He then goes on to discuss the company that Mod Yuey founded before joining Jagex as a community manager. He allegedly sat and watched through all the company's YouTube content and perused their website to learn more about the company. Holy shit, guys! I think I finally found the first glimpse of journalistic integrity. But what's the catch? He mentions their YouTube and Blue Sky subscriber and follower numbers, showcasing that they're low. I found it a bit weird that he only mentioned 2 social media sites and not even Twitter. Instead, he chose the much smaller social media platform Blue Sky. So, flexing a bit of journalistic integrity of my own, I went and took a look at Gamer Inc.'s presence on social media. My findings were unsurprising. Their Twitter has 3,200 followers, their Facebook group 2,100 followers, and their Instagram has over 13,000 followers. So I'd say for a niche community group designed for LGBTQ locals of London to meet up in person and bond over a common love for gaming, their internet presence is pretty good. He goes on to state that according to Yuey's LinkedIn, all his professional references are just members of this company he founded. Well shit, all my professional references are previous coworkers too. Guess I can never hack it as a community manager. Also, none of my professional references are on LinkedIn. They're all in written document form that I can easily send to hiring managers. For all we know, the references on his LinkedIn aren't the only ones he has.
Or B, they wanted to hire an LGBTQ activist as community manager of a 25-year-old game.
Or C, he interviewed well, and his previous experience as a community manager for another game developer gave them confidence in his ability to perform, but that's just a guess.
Kathaar is really out here stitching together every Reddit defense tactic like it's a patchwork cloak of cope +3. He accuses Prideslayer of grifting, of reaching, of fear-mongering,
lying, misinformation, and pandering,
but never actually disproves the core issue, that ideological bias is moderating the conversation before it can happen. And look, I get it. This stuff makes people uncomfortable. It's easy to pretend that it's just one guy, or one tweet, or one coincidence, but it's not. It's culture. It's a worldview that doesn't tolerate disagreement, and it always finds its way into positions of influence, especially when those positions involve controlling speech.
So every angle he's pushing here falls flat immediately if you're even remotely familiar with the subject matter.
Jagex didn't hire a community manager. They hired a bouncer for the ideology club.
This isn't about one bad apple. It's about the orchard being replanted with activist fertilizer.
Community managers are also responsible for making posts on socials, and it's abundantly clear that the ads and media that they put out there is completely out of touch with the game. Everything they post depicts RuneScape as a cringe, dress-up Roblox simulator instead of the 25-year-old epic fantasy game that it actually is. RuneScape was never meant to be a canvas upon which political activism was painted. It was meant to be an escape from reality, a bit of dopamine after a hard day at work, something you could work toward by getting your first 99, a place you could even go when you had no friends to hang out with. Unfortunately, I think that it might be too late to save RuneScape. You have people who are actively trying to undo the magic of a game and preach to you. Bigotry doesn't exist in Gelinor, even though Death to the Dorgashan features humans against monsters who are quite literally human supremacists. It might feel impossible to make your voice heard on platforms like Discord and Reddit. Unfortunately, the community management team has quite the lockdown on both of them, allowing them to say crazy and radical woke ideology while snuffing serious and genuine concern about the game. The Reddit might even actually be worse, as it's hard for individuals to actually audit and communicate on whether their posts were deleted or not.
So this is the real bait and switch. You get updates nobody asked for, censorship when you complain, and if you push back too hard, suddenly you're the problem.
Oh, you had feedback about the updates? Sorry, that violates the safe space protocol. Now hush, radical normie.
Genocide is bad isn't considered a political statement because most people agree with it. It's considered common sense, and so it doesn't get as much attention or elicit any debate. Trans rights, however, isn't something the community has come to a consensus on. It can be debated, and is therefore political. It's important to note that what is considered political in this frame is anything on which the community disagrees.
Yes, we, the community, disagree.
And so, making political statements, irregardless of rationality, means you have an agenda. And having an agenda is ruining the community. And you should stop. If you look at Prideslayer's argument through that same frame, you can clearly see why he takes such a blatantly hypocritical stance on what is and isn't political. The entire keep politics out of our games stance is a commonly used line of logic amongst people who have fallen in with antagonistic or sometimes outright fascist groups. Lying, misinformation, and pandering. There's a great video by Innuendo Studios titled The Alt-Right Playbook, How to Radicalize a Normie. Now, to clarify, I am not accusing Prideslayer of being an alt-right radical who is trying to infiltrate our community. I'm saying he might be the radicalized normie.
And if you still push back, well, that's not feedback anymore. That's radicalization. Because to Kathaar, the issue isn't whether Jagex is dodging criticism with rainbow smoke bombs. It's that calling it out makes you the problem, and you're a radical normie.
But he yet again fails to get his facts straight.
Reminder, expressing concerns about monetization or game updates violates our safe space protocol. Please remain silent and consume, you radical normie.
Imagine being so deep in the narrative that when someone criticizes a video game update, your first instinct is to psychoanalyze them like you're the gender studies professor of Gillinor.
Journalistic integrity.
This is what you do when you don't want to address the actual complaints. You shift the spotlight.
Lying, misinformation, and pandering.
From pay to win to pay for pronouns. From broke economies to broken binaries. MTX criticism becomes hate speech. Identity updates become moral shields. And players who actually want the game to be better get painted as
the radicalized normie.
Talk about gaslighting.
Gaslight, gatekeep, monetize. And the beauty of this model, it's self-defending. Any criticism becomes proof of intolerance. Any skepticism gets labeled as radical. And the devs, they just keep stacking cash while pointing at rainbow banners like they're bulletproof. You don't have to believe every conspiracy to notice the pattern. We're not looking at isolated updates. We're watching a calculated rebranding. A game that used to be about skill trees and quests now wants to sell you social consciousness for real-world cash.
Coming soon, Yak Track, Allyship Edition. Complete 12 daily challenges to earn your Rainbow Combat Cape and Emotional Resilience buff.
Unlock the final reward and you get the Makeover Mage's personal journal, rewritten every week.
Ultimately, though, what do we want from RuneScape? We want to be back in control. The reason old school is so popular is because of the fact that every step of the way players are involved. Ultimately, I do hope that RuneScape 3 gets back on track. I hope the developers truly realize that nobody wants this cringe little kid garbage, and it's incredibly confusing to see juvenile content like this released alongside stuff that features so strongly gender ideology. And the fact is, the game is 13 plus, and just to even use a role in the Discord, you have to scroll through like 2 pages of sexuality. How confusing is that to both cater to children and also sexuality? I would prefer we get back to making epic fantasy, diving into dungeons, slaying gods, and saving mortals.
So before we close, I reached out to both Prideslayer and Kathaar because ultimately I had a few questions of my own that I wanted to ask the both of them, and here's what they had to say. First up, Prideslayer. Some critics of your video would argue that you conflate activism with identity. What would you say to the players who feel represented by these updates?
I would say that just like you have the right to point out and criticize things that you like and support, so do I. And I'm not interested in that type of content, and I have the ability as a human being and community member to advocate for updates that I would prefer instead.
How would you differentiate between organic representation and ideological insertion?
My favorite moderator, Modraven, is an LGBTQ member, and his storytelling is some of the best in the game. Now, some people do think the fact that Armadil was gay was too much, but it was very nonchalant, and Armadil was a very, a badass entity. And it's very similar to like how J.K. Rowling wrote Dumbledore. It felt organic. It's like, okay, that nobody cares what Dumbledore does because the story is about, this ongoing war between factions. And so I feel the same way with writing prior to Fort Ferentry. And it's not something that's been overwhelming, but it's more of like a tone and a theme and something that the community wants more than they want good updates, especially, during June.
Now let's give Kathaar a chance to defend himself. He declined to follow up. And here I thought he was the facts and citation guy, but apparently the only thing he's citing today is PTO from Critical Thinking.
He rage quit the comment section of his own rebuttal.
Look, when the platform is yours, you get to script the edit, set the tone, cherry pick the clips. But when someone wants to ask you a couple of basic questions, not traps, no trick edits, no gotchas, and you bail, that says more than your video ever could. And if your arguments were so bulletproof, what are you hiding from?
He fact-checked a vibe but couldn't handle a DM.
This wasn't a dunk attempt. It was a chance for dialogue, but Kathaar made it clear he's not here to converse, just to control the conversation. So now that the dust has settled, who made their case? And who just cosplayed as the comment section? Let's start with Prideslayer. Not flawless. Pacing was rough, the tone got fiery, and the script could have used a little bit of polish. But he hit the mark. Why? Because he told the truth no one else would.
He didn't just swing for the fences, he pointed to center field first.
He said what most of us felt for years, that something changed. It wasn't random, that identity, features, and DEI hires weren't isolated updates. They were the software of a larger ideology. Call it raw, call it cheesy, but don't call it dishonest. He gets an A-, not for perfection, but for pulling the fire alarm while everyone else was posing for the diversity photo. And then there's Kathaar.
DEI for effort.
Polished? Yes. Well edited? Sure. But the man brought a thesaurus to a truth bomb and acted shocked when it didn't defuse it. He didn't engage, he evaded. He didn't refute, he reframed.
Lying, misinformation, and pandering.
All while quoting lore jokes as canon and defending the community manager who showed up to a protest for a literal terrorist because Prideslayer misread the calendar.
Imagine defending a bearded NPC and missing the point by a whole gender mile.
It's not just a bad take. It's bad faith, wrapped in smug and padded citations that don't challenge, they distract. He gets a D+.
Didn't I say DEI for effort?
A few points above failing for at least being brave enough to upload.
Even a D student is a passing student.
At the end of the day, this isn't about gender sliders or MTX. It's about control of language, of criticism, of truth.
They say it's about tolerance, but they can't tolerate it when you disagree.
Representation, fine. Dialogue, better. But forced ideology and scripted silence. That's how games die before their servers do.
So speak up, even if your beard isn't lore-friendly.
And if we don't push back with words and open debate, it won't stop here either. And here's the question I have for all of you who made it this far. And thank you so much for listening to my take on this very hard to hear topic. And subscribe to the channel if you're new here because it really does help.
And newsflash, it's free. Go on, I'll wait.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought. Something I call the flip test. Let's imagine for a moment that Mod Yuey wasn't the founder of Gamers Inc. Instead, he co-authored Project 2025 and sat on the board of the Heritage Foundation. Let's imagine he wasn't tweeting about radical protests, but instead Bible verses over photos of his wife and kids. Let's say he wasn't banning people for so-called alt-right dog whistles, but he was actively removing Reddit comments, pushing inclusivity, LGBTQ, or accusing RuneScape of being too conservative. And let's pretend that instead of making the game more inclusive, he was on a mission to make it more Christian, more conservative, and more patriotic. Would you be okay with that? Would Kathaar call that representation or domination? Would the subreddit applaud him or call for his resignation? If it only bothers you when the ideology isn't yours, then it was never about inclusion. It was about control. But that's just what I think. What do you guys think? Why don't you let me know in the comment section down below?